Of all ages. Okay, after the great presentation this morning, we're going to move on to wildlife. We have a very unique opportunity for you today. Have an opportunity to have an active falconer in amongst our midst to fly in just to help us out. Thanks. Again, the wildlife presentation, the site supervisor for wildlife is Paul Ricard. Paul has brought a friend who is going to talk to us a little bit about falconing later on. Paul's going to talk to you about the wildlife test and the information that you need to know about wildlife. So without further ado, Paul Ricard.
So are you clapping for him or for me? No, never mind. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out to the wildlife workshop. It's always good to see a good turnout, especially considering all the other things that you could be doing today. Normally, for my workshop, for those of you who have been to a few, you know that I would generally give a little presentation on some topic and then turn the program over to someone else to present the second half of the program. But because the second half of the program is so much more interesting than anything that I could ever talk about, I'm going to keep my statement short. I wanted to talk to you about the exam, just to let you know. As usual, there will be, on the day of the competition, you'll work as a team. You'll have true, false, multiple choice, and some fill-in questions. There will be tiebreakers that will be clearly labeled as tiebreakers. You should be studying the concepts that are outlined on the wildlife section of our web page. You should understand the terms, not just memorizing them, but really understanding what they mean. Because although I may ask you to, pair up a definition with a word or a phrase, I may also ask you something that you need to think about and select the correct answer. So memorization is great, but thinking is better. So make sure you understand the concepts and how they might apply to wildlife management and wildlife species in general. There'll be questions on the legislation. Now, I'm reading off this piece of paper. I have one for each team, and it basically is going to repeat what I'm saying. And I would say 60% of the examination is going to be, 60 to 70% of the examination is going to be from the information that you can get from the website or the interweb, if you know how to use that thing. So, important legislation, wildlife diseases, invasive species, and keep in mind it's all going to be about local or regional species. We're not going to be talking about giraffes and lions and tigers, although bears perhaps. And it will be current events related as well. So if something is newsy, you might find a question about it on your exam. The remainder of the exam is going to be based on this year's wildlife theme, for me anyway, and that's going to be raptors. So raptors of Rhode Island, which includes hawks, owls, harriers, the native species, as well as the species that might be migratory through, for instance, peregrine falcons. You should know their life histories, their importance, their habitat requirements, all those sort of good things. And with that in mind, I'm going to, first of all, any questions on that? Great, I did a good job. Sure. The list really isn't that long. So the list is all of them. But there may be emphasis on one species in particular, but I'm sure you'll figure that out. So included in that 30% is going to be questions related to the presentation you're about to get. Our next speaker is Jim Gwiazinski, who you can just call Mr. G. I don't think his children call him Mr. G, but it's easy to remember that. Mr. G is a master class falconer, which you should be very impressed by, because it's not easy to attain that title. He has pretty much single-handedly maintained the sport and tradition of falconry in the state of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and probably Massachusetts as well. He's well known throughout the New England for his falconry experience. He has trained the majority of falconers that are currently active. I don't know how many apprentices he has had. 30? Is that somewhere around there? At least a dozen. He's here to give you what I think you'll find interesting presentation on falconry and the sport of falconry. And I'm pleased to introduce to you Jim G.
I'm going to sit so I can get to these slides. What I'm going to do is I'll just give you an idea of falconry in and of itself, definition, boring things like that, but I'll get right through that. And then I'm going to get into some of the pictures of the birds that we've used. Some are mine, some are from other falconers throughout Rhode Island, Massachusetts. I get up to Maine quite a bit. I hold a Maine license as well. Years back, I was flying a lot of goshawks. I don't know if you all know about northern goshawks. They're hard to find. They're very recluse. They do not do well with human intrusion. You get any type of human intrusion, they're gone. They'll leave the nest. They'll actually leave young if they're pressured really, hard by development. So I go up to Maine. So what I'll do is you'll see a bunch of pictures here of birds that I've flown that we use, some of the trapping methods we use. Just don't try them at home. Also, I have another section on imprints, which is what we do with these goshawks. We imprint them. They're really high-strung birds. They're basically the Porsche end of falconry. So what we do is we imprint them to the falconer, which can be dicey. Only general-level falconers are allowed to do that. And then towards the end is just some other stuff, some hunting photos. So if you cringe at a little bit of blood and guts, you might want to turn away. Remember, it's a hunting sport. It goes back about 4,000 years ago. Before the invention of firearms, this is how they put food on the table, really. So, no further ado, this is the definition that a lot of the old-time falconers use. The definition's changed a little bit. It's now the pursuit. The hardcore guys consider it the capture. You don't want to get away from the fact that it is a hunting sport. Raptors are predators, and you're just using that predatory instinct to basically, Tom Cade of Cornell called falconry advanced bird watching. It's a little more than that. There's a lot that goes into it, as Paul had referred to earlier. What I also want to say is Paul had a huge part of the regulations that we have in Rhode Island. They are extremely falconry friendly. there's a lot of states that have some really cumbersome regulations. Connecticut, for instance, they cannot trap their own birds. They go to New York, Connecticut, or Rhode Island, or Massachusetts to trap birds out of the wild. We're allowed to trap these birds. They are a wild passage, meaning they're a first-year bird. First-year birds have about a 70% mortality rate. A hard winter like this, probably even more. We had a red tail come through our yard. It's taken out 2 chickens in the last week. They can't go to Stop and Shop, so we let them eat. We usually leave the chicken there so the bird can come back and have dinner or breakfast the next day. There is a sponsor apprenticeship that comes down from the feds. You need to get an 80% or better on the state issue test, which is a tough one. You really need to know raptors, their behavior, how many eggs are in a clutch, different types of birds. There's the construction of a mews, not to be mistaken with the mews in downtown Wakefield. Way back when, a mews was actually to hold over birds. It kind of was watered down, and I guess it was, back then, it was to hold over horses there at the Mews Tavern. We're allowed to trap a wild passage red tail, and then there's a plethora of equipment that you need, some of which I have up here. So when all is said and done, you're all welcome to come up and take a look at the hoods and the jesses and the bells. I'll refer to them here so you can get a better look on it as well. And anything there's a lot of nomenclature, a lot of vocabulary that goes with the sport. So if at any point in time there's something that you're really like, I have no idea what he's talking about, just raise your hand and ask me. So these are the falconry levels. 2 years, you're an apprentice. The general level and or master class, usually, I think, is it second year general, Paul? Second year general can apprentice or sponsor someone. A first year general cannot. Quite frankly, you don't know enough. There's a lot that goes into the sport, and you really should have, if you really ever do get into it, you really want a general that's towards the latter part of his general years or a master class falconer. That's basically the breakdown there. I don't want to bore you with all this stuff. This was my sponsor. When I first got into it, there was only one other falconer who's no longer practicing in the sport of Rhode Island. I had to go to Cape Cod, out in Yarmouthport. That's Dick Morrison. That's a goshawk, which is considered a bird of the fist. They are extremely fast. You can hunt them from the glove. Red tails, you have the advantage of putting them up in a tree so they can get rabbit and squirrel. Excuse me, that was Dick Morrison. This is one of my first mews. It's simple. The barring has to be vertical. You want it, everything is framed. If you look on the outside, you want the interior of it to be extremely smooth so that they're not chipping feathers. The simpler, the better. Some of the equipment. Bells are to locate the bird, essentially. It's also a good way. I take them off now when it gets really cold. I don't want the bell resting on any of the toes. They can get frostbite. So the bells are off the bird. I'm done hunting, too. We're allowed to go to the end of February. I abide by the same small game laws that someone with a 22 would. Gauntlet, you'll see that. That's basically the glove. That's more for the bird than me. These birds don't foot you. Essentially, it's a good way for them to hold on. Once you really man down a bird, it takes about a month. We trap them out of the wild. They're really calm. They should be. So the better adjusted they are, the better hunting partner they make. Leashes, jesses. These are jesses. This is how we hold on to the bird. It's kind of the setup. So that's the anklet. The jess comes through. We hold on to the bird with the glove. Different bells, different tones. A lot of guys, they like to put really big bells on red tails. I think it's just overkill there. So this is how we find them. This is a Merlin bell, a little smaller. So the tones are different. Different size hoods. There you go. Red tail does not have a red tail its first year. That's what it looks like. So when we're trapping birds, that's what we look for. We try not to grab a hag. We call them hags, a haggard. They have a red tail, we leave them alone. They're part of the breeding population, and they've done their part. They've truly, the survival of the fittest. They've made it through their first year, and their second year, that red tail will come in.